All right, so I think we're good enough to go here. So I'm James Moran and been practicing meditation for about 3 decades now, archetypal astrology for about over a decade now. And this is a dynamic time that we live in. This is a very dynamic time that we live in. And it's a ripe time for personal awakening, personal expansion of our sense of what it is to be an individual in the world, and also our collective awakening, collective expansion. So it's a dynamic time, and it's one in which there's a shift happening, a great shift happening across the whole of the world. That shift involves the experience that we in our deepest individual core are not really separate from the world, or even separate from the universe and all of its grand turnings. And so exactly how we're not separate, exactly how we as a species are witnessing this right now, and exactly what this is going to mean for your meditation practice is what we're here to explore today. This is obviously the Great Shift Part 2, how to grow beyond meditation in your psychospiritual evolution. And the fact that you're here today with us is a sign that you're at the forefront, honestly, of this shift here that's happening. And do you feel a shift? Do you feel a shift personally? If you Do you feel a collective shift? Do you feel a shift? Do you feel a shift in the world? And if so, how is it showing up for you personally? That's something I'm curious about. If you can capture it in a sentence, go ahead and keep that chat window closed and just kind of dial it in there. I'm curious. Interesting. Okay. Okay. So we're feeling some things very personally here. Okay. All right. Excellent. So the great shift that I'm going to be talking about today is basically it is moving us as a collective towards what a lot of us actually crave, what a lot of us crave, and that is to feel that we have a rightful place in the universe, to feel that we have a rightful place in the universe, to feel that we belong here, to feel that our struggles are justified, to feel that we're part of something that is larger than us, yet centered within us, something that can access bliss, joy, peace, that is actually inherent in our being, inherent in our nature. There's a trope in some myths and traditional stories. There's a trope where a child is born. A child is born of like a god and a goddess, or a child is born of a king and a queen, or a god and a queen, or a king and a goddess, some permutation thereof. And that child gets separated from its parents. And then that child goes through all types of difficulties and tribulations and vicissitudes, and eventually discovers their true identity and their true home. And it turns out that their identity is royal, and their home is regal, and they feel more than justified, more than reconciled, because through the mistaken identity, they gain some strengths that they maybe otherwise wouldn't have gained. Okay, so this is a common trope in a lot of myths. And in a way, the story of the Buddha is kind of like an archetypal spiritual version of that story. So the story of the Buddha is an archetypal spiritual version of that same trope, in the sense that he was a young man in ancient India who observed that life was full of suffering, and he sat under a tree and absorbed himself in meditation so that he could investigate, what is this life thing all about? What is this life thing all about? And in doing so, he discovered his true identity and his true home. And his true identity was regal and noble, and his true home was blissful, peaceful, joyful, loving. And then he went out into the world and he shared his discovery with others so that they could then discover their true home and their true identity and access the bliss and the joy and the peace inherent in their nature that they so desperately wanted and needed. And so it's kind of like an archetypal spiritual version of that story, although it's flipped on its head, because supposedly the Buddha began as royalty in this material world. He's supposedly born into a family of royalty, and then he left that to find his true identity and his true identity. And so it's a little bit different than the trope, because usually a trope is they're born into royalty, then they get separated from royalty, and then they come back to it. But the story of the Buddha flips that on its head. I first heard that story, it was 30 years ago. I was a teenager. I was a suffering teenager. I had no peace of mind. I basically sat, I was at a friend's house. I'd run away from home. I was at a friend's house, and that friend recounted to me the story of the Buddha. And shortly thereafter, I began my meditation practice, my first meditation practice. And I don't know if, has anybody experienced something where you start your own meditation practice and you sit down to meditate and you expect to have realization like pronto? I had an experience like that. I felt very self-contented in taking up meditation. I felt like I'm so self-contented because I'm self-sufficient and I am independent, and all I need is myself to find the answers within. And I felt very good. And I sat for meditation. I sat and 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 I sat for decades. And I sat for over 10,000 hours. And I didn't quite, just close my eyes and experience the realization pronto in the way that I had imagined. And so fortunately, there's this great shift happening that's going to allow you to avoid some of the mistakes that I made. So what is this great shift? Before we go into it, I just want to connect with you guys a little bit and ask, does anybody here have a meditation practice? If you can describe it in a sentence, go ahead and enter it into the chat. I like your insights, Aaron. Yeah, single point of focus. Okay. As far as I'm concerned, anything can be a meditation practice. Any meaning like like any tradition, any school, any approach, as far as I'm concerned, that works. And who here is trying to start a meditation practice? All right, good. We got something for all of us today. If you already have a meditation practice or you're starting a meditation practice. Okay. All right, good. Whole variety. So we got something for everybody today. So who of you have had an experience like this? Like you're proceeding in your meditation practice or in your spiritual path, if you haven't yet started a meditation practice, and you're proceeding and you're making progress and you're feeling positive, and then some old behavior pattern, some old addiction, some old emotional reaction, some old thought pattern pops up. Over here in the US, we just had Thanksgiving. Some people spend it with family, and sometimes that pops up an emotional reaction. So have you ever experienced where something pops up, an emotional reaction, and it kind of sends you back in your progress? It sends you back to square one, and you feel some sense of dejection. Has anybody ever experienced anything like that? Okay. Okay. All right. So if you have experienced something like that, to some extent, it's no wonder, in the sense that you may have had some obstacles stacked against you in meditation practice. And you may have had some obstacles stacked against you that you may not have been aware of. Obstacles even beyond just what is there internally in terms of our personal challenges. There may have been some kind of cultural obstacles there as well, in the sense that, so what are these obstacles, and what is this great shift that we as a species have been working towards for thousands of years? So in order to get a better sense of it, let's examine two cultures, okay? Two cultures that divided 2,000 years ago that are recombining, okay? You down for that? So, okay, so one culture we've investigated already, which is the culture that basically involved a great spiritual enterprise in ancient India that culminated with the enlightenment of the Buddha. And the Buddha, somebody who sat beneath a tree, absorbed himself in meditation to investigate what is this life thing all about. And he discovered that everything, including our identity and our, the entire physical universe, our identity in the entire physical universe, all of it arises from consciousness. It all arises from consciousness. Yet this conflicts with the conclusion of the second culture. Does anybody have any premonition of what the second culture might be? So the second culture began with a spiritual enterprise, a great spiritual enterprise in ancient Greece. And it involved two philosophers, one young and one old. And the old philosopher wrote down nothing, and the young philosopher wrote down everything. Does anybody have any idea who these two philosophers were? All right. So yeah, so I'm going to give another hint for those of you who might still be guessing. So the oracle at Delphi in ancient Greece, the oracle of Delphi was like a sibyl or like a prophetess. And the oracle of Delphi declared that there was none wiser than the old philosopher. There's none wiser than the old philosopher. Yes, Socrates and Plato. So Socrates and Plato, two ancient Greek philosophers. So they were on the same quest as the Buddha, to understand life at its depth. They wanted to understand life at its depth. Yet whereas the Buddha observed life in solitude underneath a tree in meditation, Socrates and Plato did so while in dialogue with others. And this began a sort of a long-term tradition. This began kind of a long lineage, a long tradition of making discoveries about life in such a way that they can be replicated in front of others. That the discoveries about life can be replicated in front of others. Okay, does that make sense? And this led to the birth of science. This led to the rational study of natural laws. This led to advancements in technology. This led to much of the progress that we as a species have made over the past several centuries. Wonderful stuff. I mean, the progress that we made in the past several centuries, a toothache. You have a toothache, now you can get it fixed. Before, in the past, that was like a life-altering potentially event. You know, central heating and AC, things we take for granted, huge advancements that have made everyday living more manageable. So this scientific study of natural laws and this technological advancement telescoped out, literally telescoped out to create things like telescopes, microscopes, sharp tools that allow us to bring the farthest reaches of the universe into focus, that allow us to investigate life. And what we found with these sharp tools is that the universe seems to be a machine-like phenomenon that is comprised of molecules that govern unbending natural laws. So it's not magic that's making everything work. It's that the universe is a machine-like phenomenon comprised of molecules that are governed by unbending laws, right? And as the tools of technology telescoped out, further out, the meaning that we give to our lives, to our subjective experience of life, telescoped inward, inward. And why not? If the universe outside us is a kind of like a mechanical phenomenon that doesn't have any inherent meaning in it necessarily, then the meaning that we give our personal lives is going to remain limited to our psychology, okay? Which, by the way, is just a byproduct of molecules in our brains obeying natural laws, okay? So those same tools of technology, they telescoped out even more, and they discovered the origin of all creation. That billions of years ago, there was a big bang, and that big bang created all time, space, and life as we know it. Okay? So that's the second culture. But wait, the first culture, the approach of the Buddha, said that all creation arises out of consciousness. And then the second, here we are saying that there was billions of years ago, there was a big bang, and all consciousness is an accidental byproduct of the resultant molecular interactions from that. Okay. So if all creation arises from consciousness, then wouldn't we who are conscious be at the center of creation? Would we not? We who are conscious? If the universe arises from a big bang that happened billions of years ago, then we humans who inhabit an arbitrary rock spinning through cold, vast, endless, mechanistic space devoid of any meaning, we would definitely not be at the center of creation. Does it make sense? So which of these cultural approaches became the predominant one in our world, the predominant cultural approach in the world? All right, getting deep over here. So it wasn't the approach of the Buddha. It was not the approach of the Buddha that became the predominant world culture. So yeah, it was not the approach of the Buddha. Even still, though, the approach of the Buddha or the approach of any spiritual teacher that has discovered that consciousness lies at the center of all creation has not been lost. I don't feel, at least in every neighborhood that I've lived in all the various neighborhoods I've lived in all over the country, I've always seen in gardens around the neighborhood little stone statues of the Buddha sitting serenely in meditation. Has anybody seen these? So we sense, we intuit that there's something of value to our inward subjective experience of life, right? We intuit that. I mean, the fact that you're here today exemplifies this. We got about 20 people more on the call today. That exemplifies this, right? So yet we still live in a predominant culture of objective experimentation. We do. We live in a culture of objective experimentation. That's just the reality of where we're at. And we talked about all the benefits that come from that. In a culture of objective experimentation, if I hear in a culture of objective experimentation that meditation helps me to relieve, helps people to relieve some of the alienation and disconnection that is so prevalent in the world today, what do we do in a predominant culture of objective experimentation? What do we do when we hear that? Does anybody have any idea? Yes. We take meditation into a lab and we study it. That's what we do in a culture of objective experimentation. And that's what's happening. And that's great that in the past 20 years, there's been literally like a staggering number of studies done on meditation. Yet, if I sit in meditation while unconsciously subscribing to a worldview that says that the universe is a machine-like phenomenon and consciousness is an accidental byproduct of the resultant molecular interactions, if I sit in meditation, and even if I'm just unconsciously subscribing to that, how much is that meditation practice going to satisfy my deep-seated need for meaning? My deep-seated need for meaning. All of us humans have a deep-seated need for meaning. Yeah, exactly. So these two kind of world cultures or approaches, these are good questions. Good questions. Let's keep them coming. And as soon as I'm done with kind of the preamble here, we're going to jump into discussion. So, all right, there's these two cultures we talked about. They seem incompatible. One says that the universe is, the universe is a machine-like phenomenon and consciousness is just a byproduct of the resultant molecular interactions. Another says that the universe and all creation arises from consciousness itself, right? So they seem incompatible, but we are going through a great shift. We really are. We're going through a great shift that allows these two world cultures, these two titans of world culture, to no longer clash, but actually become more recombined, becoming more than the sum of their parts. So what is this novel synthesis? What is this novel synthesis that allows this recombination? And yeah, what is this novel synthesis? So in order to understand it, let's do this. Let's tease apart the best parts of both of these cultures. Okay. Are we game? Are we game? We'll tease apart the best parts of both of these cultures. And this is just my perspective on what the best parts of these two cultures are. You may have your own perspectives, and I'd love to hear in the chat. So, yeah, a la carte. So basically, from the culture of the approach of the Buddha, or any meditation teacher, any spiritual teacher who has discovered that consciousness lies at the root of all creation, is basically a hope that our true identity and our true home is blissful, is joyful, is peaceful, is loving, is life affirming, just like the true home and the true identity of those children from the myths, right? From the culture of science and technology, we have sharp tools of investigation that allow us to literally bring the farthest reaches of the universe into sharp focus for us. We know what the celestial bodies are. We know where they are. We can literally observe and understand the workings of the universe spinning all around us, right? We have a culture of intellectual rigor. We have a culture of intellectual discernment, right? Yeah, so let's return for a moment, if I may, I'd love to return for a moment to my story. So why was I so concerned with being self-sufficient in meditation? Why was that when I started out, that 30 years ago I was telling you about, why was I preoccupied with meditation being a self-sufficient activity? And why had I spent so much time meditating without experiencing the realization that I was aiming for? And how can you avoid this? So what I wasn't aware of is that I was taking a posturing with me into my meditation practice. What I wasn't aware of is I was taking a posturing with me into my meditation practice. And that posturing was not trusting of life. That posturing I was taking with me into my meditation practice was not trusting of life. Yet it turned out that I could trust life. And my life did guide me. And what my life guided me towards, I personally never in a million years would have imagined that I would get interested in. I was somebody who was interested in independent, inward-looking, self-sufficient meditation practice, relying on myself. And what my life guided me towards was something very unexpected for me. And what is that thing? What is that thing? We want to know? So when we take those sharp tools of technology, we aim them at the heavens, and we take a snapshot of the heavens the moment an individual is born. We have in that snapshot a portrait of that individual and their nature and their personality. And when I first discovered this, I actually didn't want to believe it. I personally didn't want to believe it because I was somebody who wanted to, I looked inward for the truth, and I wanted to rely on myself, basically. Why would I look at literally the farthest objects away that my eyes can perceive to understand something so close to me as my own life? Why would I do that? Yet, when I looked at that snapshot of the heavens the moment I was born, that portrait of my nature, called the birth chart, by the way, I understood the insights that I gained, gave me, helped me understand aspects of myself that decades of meditation had not shown me. And not only that, that portrait of myself wasn't just a portrait of my nature and my personality and my tendencies. It was a portrait of the story of my life. It was a portrait of the story of my life. So it was a portrait of the challenges that I'd been through and the strengths that wanted to come from those challenges. It was a portrait of the people and situations associated with the story of my life. So this is this is where the implications are for the great shift. A portrait of the universe outside of me not only reflects my nature and my personality, my core nature, it reflects this unfolding story of my life with all its meaning and purpose. With all its meaning and purpose, yes. So did that change my distrust of life? Yes, it did. You know, the individual was placed back in the individual in the meaning that I gave to my life was placed back in the center of creation. I no longer needed to be a island and rely only on myself. My life revealed itself to be an unfolding play of growth, insight, meaning, custom tailored to me. So I was no longer like a biological accident spinning on a rock through cold, vast, mechanistic, endless space devoid of meaning. My life has meaning because my life is meaning. My life is meaning. And so, okay, so how would this apply to you? You know, how would this apply to you in your meditation practice, your spiritual path? Like, think, for instance, of that behavior pattern, that emotional reaction, that addiction, that thought pattern that rears its head and it knocks you back to square one, belittling all your progress. If the birth chart, if this picture of the universe reflected insights into my core nature that decades of meditation hadn't shown me, then it must reflect my nature at its depth. And it does. It reflects my nature at its depth. And so what are the like for instance, I get this with the clients that I work with. What the client had perceived in themselves to be a character flaw, through the birth chart, through the insights of the birth chart, we learn, through the reframing of the birth chart, we learn is actually a strength via the understanding of that part of their character, or of their character as a whole at its depth. reveals that side of themselves to actually be a strength when it's understood at its depth and it's placed in the right arena. The client who, through the birth chart, learns that what was previously thought of as a too strong of an emotional reactions that you would have turns out to be a strength and a depth of emotional power that actually ends up translating into her ability around food and understanding how to kind of offer food to others as a form of healing. The client who learns through her birth chart that what she thought was in herself of as a lack of intelligence, as exemplified by grades, by bad grades she had gotten growing up, is actually an ability to painstakingly, slowly, intensely focus her mind. The client who learned through the birth chart that what he thought was a tendency to want to control others ends up being a skill in its strength in the skill of shamanic drumming. That's actually very healing for others. It goes on like this. Like there's these qualities in ourselves when we get the full picture. We get the context right. We can understand the arena. And then there's the larger implication, perhaps one of the largest implications of the birth chart itself, is that if the heavens reflect my core nature and the heavens are reflected themselves in my core nature and they reflect each other so accurately, then there are two sides. It's like they're two sides of one coin or one whole. One whole. So it's like our true nature and our true home is regal and is royal, just like the kids in those myths, and grand, as grand as the grandeur of the heavens themselves. So we don't need to necessarily isolate ourselves or feel separate when, every person we meet, every situation that transpires, every starry night that we gaze at is an opportunity to literally encounter ourselves. And therein lies the heart opening. Therein lies the bliss, actually, honestly, in the heart opening. And that's what I feel, at least, is what is very essential or very important for facing the issues that we're facing globally. We have ecological issues that we're facing globally, socioeconomic issues that we're facing globally. And the key seems, from my perspective, the key there is if we are meant to be the way we are, if we're meant to have the nature that we have, then we've been shaped with the intention that goes into shaping a puzzle piece. And ecosystems like the Amazon rainforest, in the Amazon rainforest, they have like species, the roles of species interlock with the roles of other species, and they create a complex that is self-regulating, and it's a complex of checks and balances that are self-regulating. So if the heavens reflect my core nature, and if my core nature reflects the heavens, am I not embedded in nature? And if I'm embedded in nature, then imagine the self-regulatory capacity of that system. So the world has an ability to heal itself, just like our body has an ability to heal itself. We cut ourselves and we heal. We have an ability inherent within us to heal. The world has an ability inherent within us to heal. And my feeling is it's up to us to act in line with that healing by finding the role that we as individuals have to play by understanding our nature, and understanding our nature in its depth, is the discovery that our nature and the world are not separate, which is the healing itself. That is actually the healing that's needed. And entailed in that is the discovery of the particular role that we have to play. So I have been talking now. I've been talking now for a little while. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to begin to wind down a bit, and so that we can transition over to like a more of a question and answer section that we're going to do via the chat. For right now, we're going to do it via the chat. So keep that chat close with your questions. Before I do, though, I just want to say that that you're going to be receiving the email, and you'll be receiving an email with a link in it, and you can use that link to access You Are Deeply Safe. You Are Deeply Safe is an ebook that I wrote, which details exactly how this insight of the birth chart, these implications of the birth chart and of the astrological perspective, the archetypal astrological perspective, can deepen and open your meditation practice, even if you haven't even started a meditation practice, or if you're a long-time meditation practitioner. It's called You Are Deeply Safe. I use my own life as an example there to show you. It's an ebook. And I'm going to send you a link. I'm actually going to, I'm going to put the link here too. You can click on, you don't have to wait for the email. You can click here too. So you can click here. You can click it in the email. If you're watching this on a replay, you can just click the link associated with the replay, and you can enter email in there, and you'll receive You Are Deeply Safe. You're also going to receive a coupon code for a one-on-one session with myself that you can redeem, and also access to all the ebooks in the Great Shift series and all the webinars. Though you'll have access to all that. And there's also part 3 coming up, the Great Shift part 3, that is also going to be in the email that you can register to. That's called Taking the Next Step Beyond Psychedelic Healing and Our Collective Psychospiritual Evolution. So this is about psychedelic healing is really becoming a topic of interest these days. And so the question is, what's the next step beyond that? And that's what the webinar is about. That's the next webinar 2 weeks from today. You'll be receiving a link for that, and you want to reserve your seat because that one is going to become very packed because it's a very hot topic, psychedelic healing. Okay, so I am going to open it up for questions here. So pull up that chat close and just fire away with your questions. I want to thank you for being just such a great group here today, a really wonderful group. And it's an honor, honestly. It's an honor to be with you. This is Thanksgiving weekend. People are you guys are taking your time and attention on an important break time, at least if you're in the kind of US, Western, North American culture there. It's Thanksgiving break. Even if you're not, you're taking your time and your attention, very valuable to me, to spend it with me and to explore this topic together. And so for that, I'm supremely honored. And let's fire it off with the questions. Let's fire it off with the questions. I'm happy to also get specific. There's the birth chart. Looking at the birth chart and understanding one's life is actually a practice with a lot of details to it in terms of specific ways that it can help us manage our meditation practice. So I'm happy to get into that too. How has archetypal astrology affected my meditation practice? It's affected it greatly, deeply, broadly, in the sense that, I'll touch on a couple points here. So one is when I sit for meditation, or more and more, I aim to look at every present moment as an opportunity to cultivate what could be called mindfulness, sense of presence, whether I'm sitting in meditation or not, whatever I'm doing. And similarly, when we look at something called your transits, which is a way of putting your birth chart and overlaying it with where the planets are at any point in time, where the celestial bodies are now, for instance, 2 years ago, 2 years in the future, 10 years ago, whatever, any moment of time you can look at. If I look at it for right now, for instance, it helps me get a sense of what is coming up right now. You know, the hope in meditation is that I feel whatever it is that I'm feeling, and I allow it to happen. I allow it to happen. Though there's a tendency in our current kind of cultural perspective that's predominant that we're in, there's a tendency like, okay, these feelings are coming up inside me. I'm becoming mindful of them. But there's somebody outside me that's making a lot of noise. Or this other person who's, you know, trying to call me, or there's, you know, these things happening outside, or somebody's trying to be aggressive towards me, or my boss is trying to do XYZ. So there's a sense that still what's inside me is one thing, and then what's outside me is another thing. And when we look at transits, we see the whole continuum of outside and inside. So there's a sense that I don't need to just ward certain things out and then be mindful of what I'm experiencing in my body and my mind. I can also be mindful that, oh, you're also my life. All this, my life isn't just limited to my body. My life is the whole unfolding story of my life. You all on this call, everyone's my life, as I am your life. So you look at your transits, it's not just that you're sitting in a chair right now trying to be mindful. It's that you're, you know, for instance, on a webinar, you're having a moment of kind of broadening of your mind, something like that. So it gives a larger sense of what is happening. And so that's one thing. Another thing is looking at the birth chart and understanding aspects of ourselves, like I had spoken of before. I understood aspects of myself that I had kind of gotten down on myself before, because I'm like, I'm meditating, yeah, but then there's this stubborn side of myself that's stubbornly like this. But when I look at the birth chart, I'm like, oh, you know, like, what is that really? You know, what really is that? What really is going on there? Let me tease it apart and see the different strands. Oh, it's not so bad. You know what I mean? It's just, it's a part of my natural energies, just like everything else. You know, I begin to understand it. What is it? Oftentimes when I see working with clients, what comes up, overwhelm, anxiety, addiction, it's a tangle of things. It's a tangle of various things that has become associated as one behavior pattern. But we look at the birth chart and we look and we tease it apart and we realize like, oh, there's this thread, there's this thread. Each thread has its own place. You know, we kind of understand it. We get some perspective there, as opposed to just seeing it as one behavior pattern that rears up and kind of overtakes us. You know, realize, oh, it's a few different threads. It's not, it's our life energy. It's our rightful life energy that, you know, we just need to kind of tease apart, understand, care for, you know, and sometimes in life, without some perspective, we just kind of charge ahead and things get knotted up and it looks like one big complex, but it's really not one big complex, you know? So there's a number of ways that it's been beneficial. If you go into a meditation retreat or a deep experience with meditation or a deep experience with psychedelic healing, you can look at your transits during that time and it can help you understand the kind of journey that you're going on, the spiritual journey, because sometimes we encounter things that are not explained by our current kind of materialist culture. We have things come up, you know, that aren't really well contextualized, and that gives us more of a context. It gives us a better context. There's so many. I mean, probably I'll keep coming up with different angles and where it's helpful and where it's supportive. I want to read some of these other questions. So what are some of the first steps in marrying archetypal astrology to a meditation practice? I can remember first steps. I can remember very early on in my archetypal astrology practice. I remember I was going to sit for meditation and I saw what's called a moon Mars transit. So that's like the moon in the sky. It takes about 28 days to do one round. And when it passes over the point in the sky where Mars was when you were born, Mars, the moon is our soft side, our emotional side, our soft tissues in our body, our soft connective relationships with people, our emotional bonding. And Mars is a hot, agitated energy, you know? And when I remember that day I saw that and I sat for meditation. I think I'm trying to remember how, I think I saw it first. And I was like, interesting. And then I was like, let me sit for meditation. I sat for meditation. I felt agitated, like really agitated. And I was like, you know what? This is the right energy to be feeling right now. And it was just so, there was something so sweet there that, like, in feeling agitated, I could be sort of, what's the word, like somehow reconciled, somehow like, oh, this is what's supposed to be happening right now. Even though it's inside me in my soft tissues and I'm feeling agitated, it's not wrong. You know, there's a sense of meditation, you know, it's a time when you calm yourself, this and that. For me, meditation is meeting whatever the current moment has for us. And usually when we meet it and we don't resist it, things tend to calm down anyways. But when we meet it and we have the lens of archetypal astrology, we can actually meet it with a little bit more optics, a little bit more line of sight of what we're actually meeting. Yeah, it can give it, because yeah, hopefully that made sense. Yeah, that's one thing that's been very helpful to me, to experience that, you know, what, and then another aspect is actually to experience meditation while in a situation that is, like, if I look at a transit and it's really dynamic and I'm in a situation where I'm having a confrontation with somebody else, you know, or I'm having a you know, a kind of a dire situation comes up and it's outside me and it's very real, but I see it in my transits. And so I know, okay, this is the energy, this is what's happening. It allows me to meditate in a non-standard way. I'm not sitting in meditation, but I'm aware of all the energies as they're happening, and I'm accepting of them. And I see, like, oh, okay, you know, this part of the archetypal combination is arising in me through feelings, through sensations. The other part of it is arising outside of me by this person that is showing up, or this situation, this dire circumstance that's coming up. And I see, like, oh, the complete archetypal play is here in the story of my life. It's me, it's what's inside me, it's what's outside me. And so then I can feel that a kind of a sense of divinity in the situation, a sense that there's some type of divine, you know, it's still, if it's a confrontation, it's still a confrontation. If it's a dire situation, it's still a dire situation, but there's a sense there that the whole thing is sanctified somehow. So the whole thing is sacred energies happening. That's my experience. Do you find when looking at your transits prior to meditation that there can be a tendency to project them in maybe an unhealthy way? Yeah, we definitely don't want to do that. If I find myself looking too much at my transits, that might happen in the sense, like I'm trying to micromanage, you know, like I'm like, you know, like meditation, have my transit ephemeris, and I'm looking and I'm like, does this coordinate? Or, you know, it's almost like a way, it's almost distrusting of life, honestly, because it's almost like I'm trying to curate or cater things in a way that I really like, you know. I look at my transits, meditate. I don't look at my transits, meditate. It doesn't, you know, I can meditate, look at my transits, you know, or just go through life. You know, sometimes I look at my transits and it's startling what happens. I'm like, whoa, like, yeah, you know, the orchestration of the universe, beautiful, you know, amazing. Even if it's something challenging, I'm like, yes, that is such a representation of my transit. So I'm in awe. Other times I haven't been looking at my transits and I just get in a situation and it's just my encouragement to myself is always to just be mindful. Okay, these energies have a place. Everything has a place. Let's be with it. Let's see how it unfolds. You know, it's going somewhere. Like a funny example is, I mean, this is almost like neither here nor there, but I think it's a good example to bring in today because we had this funny day where everybody showed up with my name. So I'll bring in this example. I took a plane ride. I was flying from actually Vancouver. It was either Vancouver or Victoria to San Francisco. And I was in the plane and it was over Seattle, and it started circling over Seattle and it was kind of like for like 3 hours, you know, should have been in Seattle in San Francisco already. And then finally they tell us, you know, one of the engines has gone out. And yeah, one of the engines has gone out and we're going to have to do an emergency landing. And so what we're doing is we're burning off fuel because fuel weighs so much. If we try and land with one engine, we're just going to come in. Apparently, I don't know this, but you come in so hot, like you come in super fast because just the weight of the plane, and it's too much for the plane to land normally. And oh yeah, what it was is the engines are used to brake. And so when you don't have one engine, it's too much. And so they were like, you know, this is what's happening. We're gonna have to do an emergency landing. And so we have to train you in crash positions. You know, we got to train you in all this stuff. And so, you know, the flight attendants going around trying to train us how to do this, how to do that. And I was on aisle seat over here is an elder Chinese woman, didn't speak any language, no idea what's going on. She thought it's so entertaining. All these people doing this, like, you know, bending down, this almost like an exercise or something. She's laughing. And the flight attendant's like, can you take care of this woman? You know, sure, I'll take care of this woman because we might have to do that slide, you know, like where that big inflatable slide comes out of the plane. We have to jump down it. And then there was a pregnant woman just up from this Chinese woman. And so the pregnant woman just loses it, like completely loses it. We're going to die. And so she looks at everybody around her. She's bawling, crying. And she says, are we going to die? Are we going to die? And then she looks at me dead in the eye and she says, are we going to die? And I remember my transits for that day. And I'm like, for some of you, you may know this, you may not, but Mercury, natal Mercury started, it was the beginning of a transit of Uranus square to natal Mercury. So Mercury has to do with travel and Uranus is the trickster, makes things chaotic. And so I was like, whoa, but then also Mercury in the sky is transiting my natal Jupiter. So I knew like that's generally a sense of good things working out. And I looked at her and I said, no, we're not going to die. You know, we're not going to die. And she looks at me, you know, she had looked at me and she said, are we going to die? And I said, no. And she looks at me and then she goes to the next person, are we going to die? Like she didn't want to accept it. And then we landed, you know, we had to do the crash thing and everything. And we landed like super fast. And we landed and we were safe and we got out there and we had to go through customs and everything. And in customs, the woman, the pregnant woman's like, I knew the whole time we weren't going to die and all this stuff, you know? And it was hilarious. And anyways, I brought that up just as a funny version of knowing, you know, knowing your transits. And I was on the plane. I was like, you know, things were going really haywire. And I was like, Uranus transiting square natal Mercury, humdinger. There it is, you know, there it is. And I could appreciate it. Okay, so in a shamanic practice, it is seeing the situation as a medicine story. I think of transits as the medicine story of the moment. Beautiful. Beautiful. I mean, yes, there's a sense in some mindfulness traditions that every situation we enter into could be an unlearning, an opportunity for unlearning. And that holds true, I feel, in a lot of psychedelic healing too, in the sense that something comes up outside of us. It's an opportunity to fully experience that thing in the moment as the whole thing is your life, not just me, I'm a victim, that happened outside, but just to be open to the whole thing and experience the whole thing, all the entire situation in a sense of that it's fresh. It's a chance to not attach it to past patterns and past preconceptions, including that I am separate, including that what's out there is what's out there. I'm me, I'm separate, almost like the way a child experiences reality. Okay, so James, back to your story. So when inclinations towards understanding of one's transits occur, what do you recommend one does with that information? Actually, you're sort of alluding to it now in your explanation. Okay, so when inclinations towards understanding of one's transits occur, what do you recommend one does with that information? So what does someone do with the inclination towards, like an inclination, like feeling inclined to understand one's transits? Is that what you mean? If that's what you mean, I would say begin to, work with an astrologer, study astrology, begin to understand the archetypes so that you can see them. You can see them come up. Like me in the airplane, I saw, Uranus and Mercury, the chaos of the whole thing. And it was chaotic and we could have crashed, but the sense there was like, it was chaotic, but it wasn't as chaotic as it could have been if I didn't recognize the archetypes at play. There was almost this sense of recognition. In the ancient ways, they would call it divinities. They would say gods and goddesses. The gods and goddesses, and even in archetypal astrology, they say this, they come into manifestation wearing the disguise of something else. The gods and goddesses never appear as themselves. Aphrodite doesn't appear as herself. She appears through something beautiful showing up. And then we say that thing that shows up is a vehicle for the goddess, or the archetype of beauty. So it's both divine and just a vehicle for the divinity. Hopefully that is helpful. What do you recommend what one does with that information? And it's not like I'm saying that everybody here has to become an archetypal astrologer and really know your transits and really know everything, everything that comes up. Oh, this is happening now. Oh, this goddess, that goddess is appearing now. My sense is, the best, the deepest insight I feel that my personal feeling that this has for us is the sense that we are the unfolding story of our lives, including the heavens above. When we look at the heavens above, we are looking at our life. When you look at me, you're looking at your life. Your life is happening. I'm my own person, but I'm also your life talking to you. You're there. You're my life talking to me. We are the story of our unfolding life. And to me, that is really a game changer, because it just, the experience and the texture of reality can really change. It can be less centered on my body even and my identity, and just a sense, but not in an unhealthy way, in a healthy way, a sense of, my life is unfolding. When I look out, there's a process of perception happening, but it's not necessarily cut up and divided up like me, what's separate from me, outside forces, victim. No. Does that make sense? Yeah, we got enough time for maybe a couple more questions here before we have to sign off in a little bit here. It is the meditation practice, particularly of the mindful sort, not mindfulness practice, or other meditation practices, added with the archetypal astrology. There really can be a beautiful kind of synthesis there. Though sometimes in the beginning, because of kind of cultural language about astrology, pop psychology, astrology, and also pop psychology, mindfulness, there can be a bit of awkwardness sometimes of melding the two. But really, I feel that they're kin. That's my personal sense, is that there's a sense of kinship there between between being mindful of the archetypes, which are foundational to reality, and being mindfulness of, you know, the breath, of the thoughts, of the body sensations, of mindful of the present moment. And then there's the ability to just marvel and celebrate the universe. Let's see here. Okay. Yeah, ability to marvel and celebrate the universe. That's another way of going about just celebrating archetypal astrology and meditation. You can look at your transits. Like, for instance, there's a question here about moon transits. Those are easy ones to look up. Lunar transits, because they only last about 3 hours. So you look at where the moon is in the sky and where it's passing over it, and when it's passing over something, a point in the sky where something was when you were born, you just look, and then you see it show up in your life, show up inside you through feelings, show up outside you as people you meet, show up outside you as situations. And then you just get to celebrate. You know, you just get to marvel, like, wow, you know, what a way the universe has of orchestrating. Like, I have an example of, I won't go into the specifics, but it was a particular moon transit in Gemini that I was having. And I remember looking at it the day before, it was a significant one. And I was like, what is going to be happening at that time? You know? Wow. And then at that time, I wasn't thinking about it at the moment, but there was this childhood friend of mine and his father that came up on both sides of me. It was after a church ceremony. They came up on both sides of me and they were telling jokes back and forth, being jokey. And it was fun and it was great. And then I was like, it just clicked to me, you know, like that the Gemini moon, the twins, the two, and I just was able to marvel at it. I was like, you know, those two people are going about their lives. You know, they got their own life and their own path and their own thing that they're doing, and I'm going about my own life, but the orchestrations and the reflections of the transits, things line up with an orchestration that is like, we can not even comprehend orchestration of that complexity and beauty, that it can line up, you know, like the things, the Venus transits, you know, like, I mean, simple stuff. Just look at when Venus changes a sign and look at what you're doing at the day that Venus changes a sign, you know, and I mean, that's just a simple, fun one that you can do. And then you can just marvel at it. You can just, I mean, those are just fun celebratory ways. You have difficult transits too, Saturn transits, things like that. They're really challenging, you know. But again, when we can marvel at that orchestration, we can have trust in life that even in this challenging situation, I know that there's some, you know, this is part of the texture of my life. This is part of the texture and the contours of my life's meaning. And I'm going to go with it. You know, I'm just going to kind of go with it, see how it unfolds, even though it's challenging. When I have Venus Neptune transits, I use art practice as my meditation. Beautiful. Yeah. I mean, that's another added benefit there, is that knowing archetypal astrology and knowing the transits, you can kind of curate them. You can know, like, oh, transit's coming up and this transit favors XYZ. So I will then, you know, get XYZ as my resources and anticipate doing something like that, as long as you have a loose hold on it, because you don't want to make it like a rigid ceremony. Like, in order to honor the gods of this transit or the archetypes of this transit, I'm going to rigidly do XYZ. You know, you want to, like, because we can't necessarily anticipate how it's going to manifest. We can get a sense of the qualities and we can kind of prepare ourselves and have the resources. Like, you know, Gretchen's mentioning here, Venus Neptune transits using art practice. So, you know, paint, colored markers, watercolors, paper, journal, whatever it is. You know, maybe you end up going swimming with friends and that ends up being, you know, like, you're about to paint and then, you know, your lover shows up and wants to jump in the hot tub with you or something like that, which is equally Venus Neptune. So we want to keep it open but yeah, that's another beautiful way of approaching it, because then you're going, I mean, honestly, life almost, yeah, every moment of life can become a ceremony in that way, in the way that we look at like ancient Greek ceremonies or ancient ceremonies from any ancient culture. You know, any moment can be looked at as an opportunity to honor the gods and goddesses, the archetype of that moment. And sometimes if you actually schedule actual ceremonies, but you keep a loose hand on it, you can be amazed at the way it pans out. It's so funny. You know, sometimes you'll schedule a ceremony and things will seemingly go wrong, but if you let them go wrong, you realize that they perfectly accurately honored the archetypes by going wrong. I remember one time I had a ceremony that I just put together about Venus. It was honoring Venus. And I had to get to this certain place by this certain time, because I think it was Venus. I'm trying to remember. I think it was Venus on the ascendant. And I was like going to get there at a certain time with the incense and the thing and the this and that, and just do a little ceremony for myself. And I got there and I tried my best, and then I did it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm 4 minutes off or 5 minutes off or whatever. And then I looked at my the chart that I was using, and it was the chart for New York, and I was in DC. And then I was like, hold on, this was after the fact. And I pulled up the chart for DC at that time, and I'd actually done it at the exact time, but I was late. You know, I was late. I was thinking I was late, but I actually wasn't late. I mean, that's just like a very concrete example, but other things show up, you know, like funny things. Like you plan something and then some animal comes, you know, you make things nice and some animal comes running through. And that's actually that's the ceremony. That's the way, that's the gods and the archetypes honoring, you know, comes and knocks things over. And then you realize after the fact, that's it, you know. Any other questions here as we begin to wind down? I just want to let everybody know that there's an eclipse happening tomorrow. And that's a great example, because sometimes during eclipses, the moon, during an eclipse, the lunar eclipse is like a big full moon. And there can be a sense of the lunar side of us, which is the emotional system. The solar side of us is the conscious will side of us. You know, we you know, we make the decisions, we will our way through life. But then the lunar side is the emotional system, the systems that just automatically, you know, we don't, our emotions is its own self-regulating system. We don't decide like, now I'm going to be rageful, now I'm going to cry. You know, it just kind of, it happens on its own. And so sometimes the emotional system can over shadow the conscious will during a lunar eclipse or solar eclipse, or even new moon and full moon sometimes. And so sometimes the sense there is that it's okay, you know, like if we're, that's an opportunity where meditation and mindfulness and awareness of the archetypes can help us avoid difficulties and overcomplications in our life, because we can sense that emotional readjustment coming up and kind of overtaking our will and our plans. But we recognize, oh yeah, that's the energy of this time. Let me allow it. Let me see where it's going. Let me be open to it. In the same way, mindfulness meditation, you know, you don't hold on, you just see what comes in and comes out. And that can really be very helpful. You know, that's something, a very kind of practical use of archetypal astrology. Because otherwise, you know, sometimes you can, you know, you might feel thrown off, or you might see people acting crazy out in the world, you know, but then you realize what energy is coming up, and you see, you can have a bit more understanding, compassion of what they're going through. You can kind of allow a little bit more of that rebalancing that's wanting to happen in you. And when we allow it, generally it takes us to a good place where we need to go. We may not have preconceived that was where we needed to go, but it takes us there. So yeah, so pre-eclipse coming up, eclipse coming up tomorrow, lunar eclipse. Solar eclipse 2 weeks after that. I'm also going to be doing a webinar with 6 other talented archetypal astrologers, Tuesday the 8th. Keep a lookout for that on social media. Yeah. And I'm going to begin to wind down now. Any last questions as we begin to wrap it up today? Any last questions? No? Okay. So I'm so honored to spend time with you. If you got another question, shoot it off while I'm just thanking you again. Time and attention is a commodity. It's not a commodity. It's something valuable. That's a personal connection. And so, I thank you for bringing that today and connecting with me. It's an honor. So yeah, I'm going to be sending you an email. You'll get my email. You can download You Are Deeply Safe, the ebook, and get that link to a coupon code to a one-on-one session with me, astrology reading. And you get access to all the ebooks in the Great Shift series and the webinars. And keep a lookout for that link for the next one, 2 weeks down the road, taking the next step beyond psychedelic healing in our collective psycho-spiritual evolution. All right, y'all. Yes. Lots of love. Lots of love.